Thank you very much, Nancy. We're going to take about 5 minutes of questions, and if anyone has more questions, you can catch up with Nancy downstairs at tea. So, are there any questions?
Yeah, thank you, Nancy. Gosh, a lot of new information there. But I've recently been inspired by Richard Wrangham's, the Harvard professor, the anthropologist, book called The Human Paradox, that has a very different perspective on this human history than you're presenting today. Mm-hmm. But in particular, with the onset of the farming age after the end of the last ice age, it's really hierarchical values that were driving culture and society, rather than patriarchy versus.
Well, the other thing to consider. Oh, I'm sorry.
More about the, hierarchical perspective, which is kind of standard thinking in the field.
My own theory about, and yes, I've heard the theory that agriculture really led to male domination, to hierarchy, to more structured societies, but I think it was concurrent with the development of the incursion, the eruption of the battle axe culture. So there may have been some nascent hierarchy going on at that point, but I think the tipping point was much more likely to be an incursion of a warrior class who said, and what was happening too among the agriculturalists, after a couple of generations, they thought that was the cool new thing, to behave the way the upper class was behaving, and they started to mimic that in their own behavior in agricultural communities and peasant communities too, eventually. So I think the two bounced off of each other as opposed to two completely separate theories.
Okay, is there another question?
Not really a question, just a comment. I'm an anthropologist and you were spot on.
Thank you. That is so gratifying for me to hear because I'm an outsider in the field, and I've only done this because I love research, and I'm a scholar and I'm a researcher, but anthropology is not my field, so intuitively it felt right to me. Thank you for the validation.
How does religion play into all of this?
Oh boy. Oh boy, oh boy. Patriarchal religion has been the single most significant factor in reinforcing and reifying patriarchy. And it's true not just of the Abrahamic religions, it's also true in Hinduism and in Islam and in Buddhism, because all of those evolved during the heyday of patriarchy. So yeah, it's really a fiercely fought battle right now to think of a substitute ideology that doesn't diminish women.
You said that in the past there was continuous warfare. Although we don't have warfare with guns and spears, I would contend as somebody who owned a middle-sized business that there's still continuous warfare. It's just my business trying to put your business out of business, and et cetera. And it's mostly men, but there are certainly more and more women owning businesses. But it's still, to me, a type of warfare.
And you're not wrong, because human nature is human nature. And my thought is that there will always be a subset of people who really live by the concept of scarcity mentality. There isn't enough to go around, and you have to compete in order to succeed. And the matristic cultures emphasize collaboration, cooperation, and support, but that doesn't mean that it was Woodstock there every day. I'd say probably about 30% of the population at any given point in time would be likely to ascribe to the opposite view, that you got to get all you can, it's dog eat dog. And I don't know that I have a solution for that, except to say that the majority, for a change, don't quite agree with that. I mean, if you look at mass movements now, there's much less of a tendency to condone that as the ideal of how people should behave. But it's out there.
Your lecture is interesting. I'm a former U.S. Army officer and a combat veteran. Mm-hmm. And I bring this up because a woman, Lisa Marchetti, was just appointed the head of the United States Navy. She's a full 4-star admiral, and so the head of the Navy is now a woman, and there are women generals as well. Mm-hmm. And but the other thing you brought up about horses is, I don't like horseback riding, but the planet, whether it was thousands of years ago or now is mostly water covered, and it is seaborne that many of the countries were founded and many of the wars were fought by seaborne troops. And Hitler was a soldier in World War I. If he had known more about the Navy, the British were instrumental in defeating Hitler along with Americans because he allowed the Mediterranean to be taken over by Allied troops in naval forces. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out here with a woman admiral and other women in military occupations.
Yeah, I think it was difficult for the military for the longest time. And, you know, I'm not negating the necessity to have a national armed services, because we are at a point in history where you can't really be naive enough to think, oh, well, if, you know, let's have a love-in. That's not going to work. But I don't disagree that eventually navies became pivotal. That was at a more sophisticated stage, years and years and years after the Kurgan Rough Riders came out of the steppes, and warfare developed in every theater that it could, and that became definitive. The British Navy, the Spanish Armada, yeah. So I don't disagree with anything you're saying, and I would be curious to see how leadership of the services on the seas would be different under female command.
Do you see AI continuing affecting patriarchy or helping women at all? Have you studied AI at all?
Well, I'm very concerned about AI as a writer. Obviously, that's something that worries me quite a lot. As a ghostwriter, anyway, it does. I haven't really thought about the implications, though technology has always been a little bit more of a level playing field for female developers. I was in tech for 20 years, and it wasn't that much of a, I never really thought of it as a male-dominated field. So I don't know what the implication would be for women's liberty or any limitation of opportunity for them in the future. That's something I'll have to give some thought to.
Okay, we're going to take just one more question.
I was wondering, in Kurgan culture, how is it that the males came to gain control of the horses and not the women, if it was a matriarchal society?
In pure Kurgan culture, they didn't. There were an awful lot of war leaders who were female. In steppe anthropology, they have found evidence of that all over the place. I think what I failed to emphasize, and I should have, is that patriarchy really got ossified after the eruption, because you're talking about traveling bands of males, unattached males, who are conquering a female population and abducting and marrying them. So that subordinated them. But within the steppe culture itself, it wasn't quite as cut and dried. As a matter of fact, there's an interesting case in China where they excavated a body with lavish grave goods, and they were calling it the Golden Man. They had him all in his armor. Well, the grave goods would indicate that this was a female war leader. So yeah, and actually the whole notion of Amazons probably originated among female steppe warriors. Yes, they definitely existed. It was the ones who left that area over the following 1,000 or 2,000 years that really, really nailed it for patriarchy.
Okay, thank you so much for coming back to see us, Nancy.
Thank you.